The boy was already running toward him. That was the thing that broke Nathan Cross completely open. Not seeing Clara standing in the doorway of that small house with her hand pressed against her mouth. Not the 7 years of grief that had hollowed him out and rebuilt him into something harder and quieter and less. It was the boy, 6 years old, barefoot in the dirt, running toward a stranger with absolutely no fear because nobody had taught him yet that strangers were something to be afraid of. He stopped 3 feet from Nathan and looked up at him with eyes that Nathan had seen every morning of his life in the mirror. "Are you lost?" the boy asked. Nathan could not speak. "Mama says you should always ask if someone looks lost," the boy said seriously. "You look lost." Nathan crouched down slowly until he was eye level with him. Up close, it was even more undeniable. The jawline, the slight gap between the front teeth, the way his head tilted just slightly to the left when he was thinking. Nathan's mother had a photograph of Nathan at 6 years old on her mantle that looked like this child had been copied from it. "What's your name?" Nathan managed. "Eli," the boy said. "What's yours?" Before Nathan could answer, Clara's voice came sharp and urgent from the doorway. "Eli, come inside. Now." The boy looked at his mother, then back at Nathan, then back at his mother, the way children weigh things they don't fully understand. "Go," Nathan said quietly. "Go to your mama." Eli went. Clara grabbed him by the shoulders and moved him gently but firmly behind her into the house. Then she stepped out onto the small porch and pulled the door closed behind her and looked at Nathan with an expression he had never seen on her face in all the years he had known her. It was not guilt. It was not fear exactly. It was something more complicated than both of those things. It was the face of a person who had made an impossible choice and had been carrying the weight of it alone for so long that the weight had become just another part of her body. "Nathan," she said. "Clara." His voice was barely sound. "You're alive. I know what you must be feeling right now. Do you?" He stood up slowly. He was not a man who raised his voice. He never had been. But something in his chest was pushing against his ribs so hard he had to concentrate to keep his breathing even. "Do you actually know what I have been feeling? For 7 years. She looked at the ground, then back at him. "Can we not do this out here? We can do it wherever you want. But we are going to do it." She opened the door and called to someone inside, a neighbor woman named Mrs. Adiz, who appeared quickly and took Eli by the hand with the practiced ease of someone who had done it many times before. Clara watched them go to the back of the house. Then she turned to Nathan. "Come in," she said. The inside of the house was small and clean and completely without anything extra. A table, 3 chairs, a shelf with a few books and a small wooden cross. A window with no curtain, just the open air and the sound of the village outside. It was the kind of home that had nothing to spare and had made peace with that. Nathan stood in the middle of it and looked around and felt the collision of the life he had believed Clara was living. The grave he had stood at, the memorial he had held, the years he had spent rebuilding himself around the shape of her absence. And this small, real, living, breathing life she had built without him. "Sit down," she said. "I'll stand." She sat. She folded her hands on the table in front of her, and she looked at him the way people look when they are about to say something they have rehearsed 10,000 times and know will still come out wrong. "I need you to let me explain before you say anything," she said. "I have been letting you explain for the last 30 seconds, and you haven't started yet." "Nathan." "Start, Clara." She took a breath. "The accident was real. I need you to know that first. The car going off the road, the river, all of it was real. I was in that water, and I was certain I was dying. I want you to understand that I did not fake my death. I did not plan any of this." He was watching her with his arms crossed and his jaw set. "A family found me 3 miles downriver. An older couple from this village, the Okafor family. They pulled me out. I had a head injury that was serious enough that I didn't know my own name for 11 days. By the time I was coherent enough to understand what had happened and where I was, 2 weeks had passed." She paused. "You had already held the memorial." "How do you know that?" "Because I found a way to access news from home when I was strong enough. I saw the announcement. I saw the photographs from the service." Her voice stayed steady, but her hands tightened against each other on the table. "I saw you, and you decided not to call me." The sentence sat between them like a stone. "It wasn't that simple," she said. It was exactly that simple, Clara. A phone call. 3 words. I'm alive. That was all it would have taken. I know that. Then why? She looked at the table for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her voice did not waver. Because I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I woke up. The room went very quiet. I sat in that clinic with a woman who didn't speak my language and a translator on a borrowed phone, and I found out I was carrying your child. And I thought about calling you. I picked up a phone 4 separate times to call you. And every time I put it down. She paused. Do you remember what was happening before the accident, Nathan? Do you remember what the 6 months before that trip looked like? He didn't answer, but something in his expression shifted. Your company was under federal investigation. Your business partner had disappeared with funds that had your name on them. There were journalists outside our building every morning. There were threats, Nathan, written threats against you that the FBI was taking seriously enough to assign someone to us. She looked at him steadily. I was terrified every single day. And then I was in that river, and I thought I was dying, and when I came out the other side, I was carrying your child in a country where nobody knew who either of us were, and for the first time in 2 years, I was not afraid. He sat down, not because he wanted to, because his legs decided they were done. You stayed to protect him, he said slowly. I stayed because bringing him back into that situation, back into the threats and the investigation and the media circus around your name, felt like walking him into danger before he had even taken his first breath. She pressed her hand flat against the table. I made a choice. I know it was not the right choice for you. I know what it cost you. I know that, and I have lived with it every single day, and I am not asking you to forgive me quickly or easily. But I need you to understand that I was not thinking about myself. I was thinking about him. If this story is hitting you hard right now, please hit the like button and subscribe. There is so much more of this story to tell, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Nathan sat with his hands on his knees and looked at the floor of this small house in a village 7,000 miles from the life he had been living and tried to find somewhere solid to put his feet. The investigation closed, he said finally. 14 months after the accident. My partner was found in Portugal. Everything was cleared. My name was clean. He looked up. It has been clean for 5 years, Clara. She closed her eyes. I know, she whispered. So why didn't you come home then? She opened her eyes. Because by then, Eli was 18 months old, and this was the only home he had ever known. Because Mrs. Okafor had become like a grandmother to him. Because I had built something here, a small life, a real one, and the idea of uprooting him from everything he knew and bringing him to a world where he would be a story, the secret son of a billionaire, the child who was hidden, the scandal, I couldn't do it to him. She stopped. And because I was afraid of me, of what I had done to you, of what your face would look like when you found out. She looked at his face right now. Like that, she said quietly. I was afraid of that. He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with his back to her for a long time. Outside, somewhere in the village, he could hear Eli's voice, high and bright, talking to Mrs. Adiz about something with great seriousness. His son's voice. For the first time in his life, his son's voice. He doesn't know about me, Nathan said. It was not a question. No, I told him his father was a good man who couldn't be with us. I told him he was loved. I told him those things every time he asked, and he asked often. She paused. He has your gap in his teeth. Did you notice? I noticed everything about him. The words came out with so much weight that Clara pressed her hand to her mouth and looked away. Nathan turned around. He looked at her across the small room, and he felt everything at once. The grief of 7 years, the relief of seeing her alive, the rage of the choice she had made, the ache of hearing his son's voice through the window. And underneath all of it, complicated and stubborn and refusing to die, something that had survived 7 years of believing she was gone. I'm not leaving without knowing my son, he said. I know, and I'm not doing this quietly. He deserves to know who he is. I know that too. What I don't know yet, he said, his voice lower now, is what we are, what you and I are. Because I buried you, Clara. I stood at an empty grave, and I said goodbye, and I meant it. And then I spent 5 years rebuilding my life around your absence. And now you're standing in front of me in a village in the middle of nowhere, and you're alive, and you have my son, and I don't know what to do with all of that yet. You don't have to know today, she said. No, but I need you to understand that everything is different now. Every single thing. I understand. Do you want to come home? The question landed between them like something fragile. Clara looked at her hands. She looked at the door behind, which her son's voice was still floating in from outside. She looked at Nathan, really looked at him, at the 7 years that had settled into the lines of his face and the steadiness of his eyes, and the way he was standing in her small house like a man who had traveled a very long way and was not going to be moved by anything less than the truth. I want Eli to know his father, she said carefully. I want that more than anything. As for the rest of it, what you and I are, I don't think either of us can answer that today. And I think if we try to answer it today, we will get it wrong. He looked at her for a long moment. That's fair, he said. I am sorry, Nathan. Her voice cracked for the first time. I'm so deeply sorry for what I took from you. I have no defense that is big enough for it. I only have the truth of why I did it. And a son who has your eyes and your jaw and your exact stubborn way of tilting his head when he's thinking hard about something. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. I want to meet him, Nathan said. Properly. Today. I want you to introduce me. Clara stood up. She smoothed her dress with her hands the way she always did when she was steadying herself. She walked to the back door and opened it and called out softly, Eli, can you come here, please? There is someone I want you to meet. Small feet on hard ground. The sound of a 6-year-old running because walking was never fast enough. Eli appeared in the doorway, cheeks flushed, a smear of something red on his chin that looked like fruit, and he looked at Nathan with those eyes that were a mirror and a question and a second chance all at once. This is Mr. Nathan, Clara said, and her voice only broke on the last syllable, just barely. He is someone very important, someone who has wanted to meet you for a very long time. Eli looked at Nathan seriously. Are you still lost? He asked. Nathan crouched down to his level. His throat was so tight, he could feel his pulse in it. I was, he said, for a long time, but I think I just found where I was supposed to be. Eli considered this with the deep gravity of a 6-year-old weighing important information. Then he held out his small hand. Okay, he said, I'm Meli. Nathan took his son's hand and shook it carefully and did not let go right away, and the room was full of something that had no name, but that both Clara and Nathan felt simultaneously. 7 years of loss and silence and grief and survival meeting in a handshake between a man and a boy who had never stood in the same room before and already looked exactly alike. Outside, the village moved and breathed, and the sun began its slow drop toward the hills, and somewhere a woman was cooking, and the smell of it drifted through the open window into that small clean room where a broken family was taking its very first careful step toward finding out if broken things could still become something whole. That step was small. It was just a handshake, but it was real. And real, Nathan had learned the hard way, was the only thing that ever actually counted. If this story moved you, please like this video right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell because part 3 is coming and you absolutely cannot miss what happens next between Nathan, Clara, and Eli. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think Nathan should forgive Clara? I genuinely want to know where you stand. See you in the next one.